I had my first pick five hit, which I've sort of dabbled in over the last couple of years. And it was a different method. I actually have these cutout numbers like that you would have on a home address on the wall or something or on the door. So I was feeling those numbers and trying to get a sense. And for some reason, that generated a pick five hit.
Keep watching to learn more, and don't forget to subscribe.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
You can now download all 9 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
You are watching New Thinking Aloud, produced by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. I am Dr. Debra Lynne Katz, and today I will be bringing you an interview with Jon Knowles. Jon and I are co-authors on the book Associative Remote Viewing. Also, he has written a book called Remote Viewing from the Ground Up, and he's also published his father's book called Passing Through. His family has a long history in political activism, and we're going to be talking about that, but only after we discuss the very important topic of using remote viewing and your psychic abilities for accessing lotto numbers. Jon is an expert in this. He's very talented. He's had a lot of success. He's also surveyed the entire field to see what everyone else is doing in this area. And so he's going to share his knowledge and wisdom with us. Jon is a Harvard graduate and has a master's degree, and he is really somebody that is so knowledgeable. He's got so much experience, and we're going to learn a lot from him. Let's get started. So, Jon, thanks for being here with me today. I've been wanting to interview you for years, and so I really appreciate that you finally came, and we have so many things to talk about. Why don't we get started by you sharing with the audience a bit about your background? How did you get into this field? And just give us an overview.
Of course, people may know that we're co-authors, so we've been in touch quite a bit for many years now, and certainly value everything you've contributed to IRVA, and appreciate the opportunity to talk on this forum. And maybe give a chance. I don't usually do podcasts or anything, so just say a little bit about why I've been in this field for 20 years and what I've been trying to do. I got into it around 1999 with transdimensional systems, but actually I came upon a book in a bookstore that I happened to buy by Ingo Swann called Natural ESP well before that. And I tried out the book, the technique, and lo and behold, they worked. My mother was here in Oakland, and we were in Cozumel, and we did a remote viewing, and it worked. So I got very interested, but then I was 40 years old or so, and we were raising kids, so I didn't get back into it till 1999. So I've been in the field ever since then, and I've always been interested in these matters as well as UFOs, going back to the 50s. I'm quite old, as everyone can see. And so I've been in several different groups. First was transdimensional systems for 3 years or so until it shut down. And I later wrote a book about that called Remote Viewing from the Ground Up. And then I was in the Aurora Remote Viewing group for a while with 8 or 9 other people. It was the first multi-method group, but we had people on 3 continents and 17 time zones or something. So we did get underway, we did launch, but we only had a few customers, and then we realized it wasn't viable. So after a few years, we shut down. Then in 2010, I worked with Marty Rosenblatt in his applied precognition project, as you did, and stayed with that for 6 years and worked closely with Marty, including doing a little bit of the programming, which was a shock to me since I'm not really a programmer, but we worked on ARV quite a bit there. And then, as you know, you and I wrote a book on that subject over 16 months while you were getting your PhD, and the book is out and certainly been used by a lot of people. I think it's a very valuable addition to the field, actually. And so then after APP in 2016, I mostly been working on my own. And then when I hit the 80s, I'm over 80, I decided to write some books. So I've written 3 books altogether, one with you and then 2 other ones. The third one's called MarxPsi, MarxPsi, which is a free downloadable PDF. And then I published my father's autobiography. That's not about remote viewing. It's about his amazing life as a member of the so-called greatest generation of World War II and labor organizing. And maybe we'll touch on that at the end of this. Yeah. Anyway, so that's briefly a little bit of my background.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible you've been in the field for so long and that you wrote a few books after the age of 80. So if anyone thinks that when you hit your 80s, you're winding down, I think you're an excellent example of how that does not need to be the case. And I am perpetually amazed. We email each other at least a few times a week, if not almost daily. And you are always keeping me apprised of the latest developments in the field, about conferences, projects, what people are doing. And we're going to get into that. But first, I would love for you to talk about your work in alphanumerics. We did cover it a bit in our book, but you have had some recent accomplishments. And so can you talk about what your successes have been as far as tuning into numbers for the lotto and lottery? Talk a little bit about the successes, and then I'm sure the audience would love to hear some of the internal approaches that you're using for that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, as you know, alphanumerics is a tough nut to crack, and it started out with Ingo Swann working on analytics that you and I have both studied and trying to learn from that. So yes, I have, to cut to the chase, I have had success in the pick 3 and pick 4 lotteries, 37 wins on that now. And a win means I bet it. And so to me, that counts, whether it's for the particular day or 4 days down the road. If you bet it and you won. And actually, that's part of the method, which was not my original idea. Someone else suggested, hey, let's look at not just betting one day, but betting 2 or 3 days in the future. And I kept track of all that, made a big chart. And lo and behold, you do have more wins in days 1, 2, 3, and 4, or draws 1, 2, 3, and 4. And as I've done some presentations at conferences on this, both Joe McMoneagle and Ingo Swann say that time is not what we think it is. Joe McMoneagle saying, what if I told you that every time you remote view, you go a little bit into the past and the future, but nobody ever talks about it? So he was clearly aware that there's some sort of slippage or fuzziness, or however you want to describe it, of time. And Ingo Swann said something similar. So other people have had some wins in the lottery too, but as you know, in our book, we have a chapter 21 that covers some of those wins, and people can refer to that if they want to. There's quite a bit of detail there. But I'll just mention some of the aspects of the methods that have been useful for me. And that is to do at least 3 methods every time you do a remote viewing on this. And I have my own specific methods, which are detailed in that chapter. One of them is automatic writing, or I call them numerograms. You draw numerograms rather than ideograms. And also I visualize and I go to a virtual beach, an imaginary beach. I go out of my chair here, I send my astral body, if you can call it that, down to this beach and have a TV set there. And I turn on the TV and I see what's on the TV. And then sometimes the number will just come into my head while I'm visualizing. So there's at least those 3 methods. But I also compiled a list of about 42 methods that people have tried over the years, including myself. But these are the ones that work the best for me, including the fact that you must not just bet one day. You have to bet 1, 2, or 3, 4 days. So you're putting out a little money. But if you bet online, it's very inexpensive. Say 25 cents you could bet per pick if you want to.
So just to clarify, So then you would tune in and get a number, and then you bet the same exact number across multiple days. So the day
That's
that
right.
the intended day, but then
That's
also
right.
the next couple of days before or couple of days
Yeah.
after your targeted day. And then to go back over your methods. So first you called it not an ideogram, but a numeriogram, where you're just explain that for someone who wouldn't even know what an ideogram is.
So in an ideogram, which Ingo Swann and others promoted heavily and is sort of dominant in the field, you let your hand make a scribble after you give yourself the target number. You're blind to whatever the target is, but you just make a scribble. And a lot of us believe that that scribble contains information about the target. So a numerogram, as I do that, I use both hands on the pencil because when I switched to using two hands, I immediately had some straight hits. It's box hits and straight hits. A straight hit is if you have the three numbers or four numbers in the exact order. A box hit is when they're in any order, but a straight hit is when they're in a straight order. That's much harder to do. I just say, okay, let's draw me a number, but I don't try to draw an exact number on the first try, the numerogram. It's an approximation. And that may be part of the reason it succeeds, actually, that you're not actually trying to draw a specific number. Sounds weird, but try it. You'll see what I mean.
Does it kind of look like a number,
Yeah,
but not exactly?
right. And sometimes it is. So if it's on the first try, if one of those five or so numbers is, or four or five numbers looks like a number, I'll record that as my number, and I'll go on to the other one that is a scribble that I don't understand what number it is. So I'll try a second time on that, or a third time. And again, this is just my method. The people who've won lotteries, some of the big lotteries, 75,000 and all, everyone has a different method. And it's not specifically remote viewing either.
And then you're going one digit at a time. So this is first digit in the first place. Going to do the method. Got that. Now you're going to the second. And so then also your beach method. Now that's very interesting because you're not just simply visualizing a screen in front of you. You're picturing the beach and you go down to the beach and then you see a screen on the beach. Why a beach? And does that matter?
I don't think it matters. It was just, I like ocean. I'm a water person and I like the beach and California. But I should add that I have another screen I go to, and that's based on the idea that in the center of your head is where you should try to imagine the image appearing. I know Joe McMonagle's spoken about that. Some of the Japanese folks have spoken about that. So I use both kinds of visualization is what it is. And I should also add a couple other, it's important to take breaks, maybe, do a week of lotteries, maybe every day you make a pick Monday and Wednesday, but then take a break for a few days. That's essential. Then there are certain other things too, but those are the main features, I guess, of my method.
So if you're doing it too frequently, do you find that starts to mess you up? Like if you were doing it every day or several times a day?
I only do one session a day. That session will generate the numbers for 3 or 4 days because I'm betting those each day.
And then you most recently had you had a successful string of numbers come to you, but you didn't actually wager on them, but you said you got 5 numbers.
I had my first pick 5 hit, which I've sort of dabbled in over the last couple of years. And it was a different method. I actually have these cutout numbers like that you would have on a home address on the wall or something, or on the door. So I was feeling those numbers and trying to get a sense. And for some reason, that generated a pick 5 hit, which was my first attempt at that. And I'll continue doing that too. So again, I think a variety of methods really helps, especially if you have, like I have 3, and each one is sort of a different take on the numbers. If you just use one method and just one bet, I don't think your chances are very good
Well,
winning.
with the feeling the cutouts, you said you have those on your wall. How do you feel them? What would you be
No,
doing?
they were numbers that might be attached to somebody's door, but I have them in my hand. There's 9 different numbers or 10 different numbers with a 0, and I can feel them. They're cutouts. They're actual material objects, and that seemed to work for some strange reason. So give it another try.
But are you feeling them with your hands or with
Yes,
your body?
with my hands. I'm just fingering them. Yeah.
And then what happens when you feel them? Like what
I
gives,
sensed each number as I fingered. I said, "Is this the one? Does this feel right?" And so I got a sensation for that pick five that worked out.
so it's a particular sensation. And
Yeah,
that's interesting because in our book, we talk about someone who won the lottery and she won over $100,000. And what she did was she would go to one number at a time and pay attention to what was happening in her body. If there was a change of feeling in her body, it registered, and then she'd go to the next digit and the next one. Are techniques that you recall people doing that have been successful?
well, I think the one that won $325,000, they had a tight team with a division of labor on a need-to-know basis. They had a tasker, they had a viewer, they had someone else who chose the photos. So they had I don't know how many photos. I guess it was a pick five. So they had whatever 49 photos or something that they used. So that's another method to win. But as I say, people are all using different methods. You know, Kahu Dave, the poor fellow who passed recently, was totally into the lottery, and he won 75,000 with his own methods, which he put online, and they're still online if you want to look them up.
Yeah, that's too bad. He just recently passed away.
Yeah,
The group that won over $300,000, they were using associative remote viewing where they were associating pictures with
photos with
different
numbers. Yeah,
and then the viewers would tune into the photos that were going to actualize
right.
later.
Each photo corresponded to a number, so they had, I guess, 49 photos.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of work. Isn't it so much easier for you to be doing the methods you're doing where you could work by yourself? It
Yeah,
only takes a few minutes.
yeah, definitely.
How much money would you say you've won total from all the pick threes?
Not a great deal because I bet 25 cents or 50 cents, and it's more like a demonstration that this is possible to do to convince others that you can do it. I could put a lot of money into it, and maybe I will someday, but it just hasn't been the driving force. I mean, naturally, I would like to win a big lottery, but I'd rather just move up to this pick five and see if I can get that because pick three and pick four very few people have won that many. I know one other person who's claimed 50 pick three wins, but he's not going online ever. So that's just the way people are. And if, of course, if someone wins a big one in remote viewing, they're probably not going to publicize it. By big, I mean $1 million.
Yeah, that was an issue we had when we were doing research for our book, that it would have been great to name more people. But then in talking to them, I mean, I was impressed that you got them to even share with you the details because you did a lot of communicating with people. But then some of them just did not want their names published. And then it starts to lower the credibility in different ways.
Right. One other point, let me make one other point, which I forgot, which is that some people might think, well, are you just betting one number each day? One three-digit number or one four-digit. No, I'm betting usually maybe 4, 8, or more numbers per day, tickets per day. So that if you just bet one, I don't think your chances are great. Although some people in the past claim to have won that doing that way. But I just wanted to add that to my.
And why did you not place a wager on the pick five?
It was purely a timing thing. It was early in the morning, and I didn't get the bet in on time. So I bet the afternoon and the next 3 days, but it was the very first one that hit. So it was purely going
Gosh,
online and not being on time for that particular draw.
how much would you have won if you had entered it?
Well, if I bet I think it's $300 or something. If you bet it, maybe more than that, maybe 400 or 500. I don't even remember since I've never won a pick five.
Yeah, we have a mutual friend, Than, and she had gotten all numbers and she would have won a major amount of money, but she didn't make it to the store in time. And I know that was traumatizing for her because she had worked so hard for weeks and weeks to get it. And then the three of us were doing some experimenting where we decided to act as a team and we each chose one digit that we were responsible for. But what did you think of that? We did have a few weeks where it seemed like we were getting some of the numbers, but I wasn't doing very well. I wasn't trying too hard, but it
Well,
wasn't
I've
going.
tried that before. I worked with two other folks for a couple of years, and we realized that we weren't supporting each other's numbers. We did better solo. And Kyle Dave always said, you work solo too. And so I work solo also, pretty much. So it was
Yeah,
interesting to try, but it was just, for some reason, it doesn't seem to gel that more people viewing it helps. Although Prudence Calabrese claimed that she did have success with multiple viewers and just using an algorithm and making just one pick. But I haven't seen the documentation of that.
Yeah, I think that we were sometimes tuning into each other's numbers. I was supposed to be in position number 2, but then I was getting number 3 a couple times, and
Yeah,
it seemed to be getting jumbled around. Yeah, it
yeah.
didn't. It didn't work so well. I just get kind of bored with numbers, though. Do you think that that you'll do better if you have a love for numbers or math, as opposed to if you really in your everyday life don't appreciate
Well,
that?
for some reason, I like numbers more than horses, so it works for me. But no, we have a couple of friends, Tom and Teresa, just love the horses, and it just never interested me. Whereas for some reason, I do enjoy doing the numbers. And also, now late in life, math seems to govern our sciences. And I never really, I took a course in calculus in college, but I didn't do well. So I've actually started trying to get a whiff of a hint of some of these equations and what they mean in terms of understanding reality. But I don't know if I'll ever get there because obviously the math is very deep and I don't plan to go that deep. So whether other people, you have to love numbers or not, I don't know, but it certainly helps that you're not bored by them.
You are always emailing me with transcripts of conferences and talks and interesting projects going on in the field. What has come out recently that really piqued your interest or you thought was innovative or advancing the field of remote viewing?
Yeah, in a way, the most interesting development is that there are about 20 people now who have posted websites about associative remote viewing. Chase McCarty with his social RV is one of the very top ones, and he's actually really good in terms of wanting to bring other people who are doing the same thing together so that we don't all have 20 people going off in 20 different directions. And he's just had a channel now on Discord, which they've opened up for him and his. But there are other ones too. I guess Cindy Miller is also developing this remarkable system that you know more about than I do, and website that you're involved with. So there's that. But there's also, I say, 15 or so other folks for whatever reason. And I think the reasons are, one, that it's a lot easier to put up such websites now with the techniques that are available, the software that's available. But second, there's a flood of people into remote viewing, and it has the overlap with UFOs, as we've talked about before. And a number of people come in just say, yeah, I've been to UFOs. I heard about remote viewing. And there is a close connection. Talked to Irva on that at your invitation. Thank you very much. And I have followed UFOs since 1952. So I think there's a lot of exciting developments in that field. But remote viewing, other than the ARV, I'm not sure, except that now with Irva undertaking to put APP, the Applied Precognition Project, under its wing, that's a significant development.
Jeffrey Mishlove just interviewed Chase as well. And then I also interviewed for New Thinking Aloud Cindy Miller. So we're trying to bring these people into the New Thinking Aloud family. And so Chase has had thousands of people, new viewers coming into his social RV platform. And then he, with another benefactor, just offered a research award, a $100,000 grant that someone I know well received that grant or is about to receive it. And that would be Cindy Miller, Helene Wabe of IONS, myself, and Damon Abrams. So we're working as a team and we actually got that grant. And what we're going to be doing is analyzing
Chase's data, and we're going to both verify his results, look at his algorithms, maybe rescore using a different scoring system to see if those viewers who did well do well with the different scoring system. We also want to find out some of the background on those viewers. A lot of them were newer, but it would be great to find out were they brand new or trained at all. And then something he was really interested in learning about was what kind of impact has participating in remote viewing had on a person's life. So we're hoping to reach back to some of those people on his platform and find out about that. But then, as you know, Greg Kay, who had first done the 13-year study, just recently did another one where he had over 5,000 participants, 5,000 people from all over the world who hadn't done remote viewing before. He paid them $5 each minimum and they participated. But he had them doing 10 sessions a day and he had them completing the sessions within a 15-minute period. So I thought that was really interesting. What do you think of that, since you were saying you wouldn't do more than a couple sessions a week for the numbers at least?
I took part in the early stages of that where you're only allowed to give words, no drawings. And so that's like tying one hand behind your back when you're fighting, but nonetheless, he got some significant results from that. But there's such quick sessions that I felt that it's okay. And he had also demonstrated in his 13-year project himself doing multiple really quick sessions per day, sometimes as many as I guess 135 sessions for a single event that he was predicting. So I think that if that works, sure, go for it. And yeah, he's just amazing that he got those results. And the $5, as he mentioned, was actually meaningful to some of these folks who were in poorer countries. It might not mean much to those in advanced industrial countries, but he kept that in mind, that it was actually helping out some of these folks by giving them some.
Yeah, and he ended up making for $130,000. I
Yeah.
think said in the end he got to keep maybe around 80,000 or so. I'm just in the process of editing our interview, but I thought the most interesting thing was that some of the people were cheating. Like in order to get the $5, they weren't really doing remote viewing, or they were entering multiple sessions, but with the same words, copy and paste.
Multiple accounts. They would open multiple accounts. So that's kind of cheating, yeah.
Did you find, even in doing your very quick sessions, that you did have some successful ones where your transcript matched the target, or did you feel like you just didn't have enough time to really develop your session?
I felt that the fact that you could only use words was a severe handicap for me, and I don't think I was all that accurate. And that's one reason I dropped out. The other was that it's going to be a lot of work for $5, and so which I wasn't willing to put in.
Yeah, hopefully if he does another project by then, AI will be better at assessing sketches, because we all know how important sketching is. I do think Cindy Miller, with her Enigmatic Technologies website, and what she's programming with it, will become, I think it's either there with analyzing sketches or it's getting a lot better, but where it pretty much looks at the sketch and then gives a verbal translation of the sketch. And her program is already starting to be able to do that. That's an exciting development. Now, you recently went to a couple conferences, or online conferences at least, that you wrote you found very intriguing. Can you talk about those?
Wow, yeah. The State of the World one that Jim Garrison and folks put on with 60 different speakers lasting 4 days was pretty amazing, because there were a number of people that you don't hear from, but who are serious people and has sometimes been at this 2 or 3 decades, ranging from people who are studying water and its patterns that it makes to white lions. And I skipped that session, so I don't know what that was about. And many other activities that are trying to work toward a new paradigm, because the present civilization is in deep trouble. And the subtitle for the conference or the forum was Code Red. So how do we get beyond that? And I thought one of the most interesting dynamics that was present was that on the one hand, there were a number of indigenous people, Native Americans, who spoke what they felt was the situation, and they were speaking bitterness to what happened to them. They were recounting their stories, and in general, they were not advising people to, let's say, demonstrate and protest about our current situation. It was more to have a view of nature and the sacredness or spirituality of nature and heed to those teachings. And one of the women who was a Native American actually said that a couple of other days of presentations were ones that she did not share. So what were those other days about? They were about protesting, about building AI, about trying to overcome our current situation in a more active way that involved AI, computers, and quantum and so forth. So there was kind of a scientific side of it and then a naturalistic or nature side of it. But the overall theme was to try to be harmonious. And that was what the Jim Garrison was superb at summing up and conducting these interviews and facilitating the discussion, wanted to stress. But nonetheless, these underlying contradictions, as we say in Marxism, which we'll get to later, were there and they will come out. But on the whole, it was just an amazing presentation with some aspects of remote viewing. As you know, Bertie Jaworski was there and she was one of the prime people. Chris Bledsoe was there with his orbs and other things that he seems to be able to summon from the sky. Anna Brady Estevez was there, who is a really top person who came out of the government and is into developing sky technologies and businesses that are going to further our civilization. So it was a wide spectrum of people, and it was very well put together, just an amazing experience.
Let's talk about that dichotomy a bit. So there's one camp that says you can use AI and technology, and that's going to help solve our problems of our world. And then others say that's going to be the downfall of our world, and we really need to get back to nature. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know you have a strong appreciation for AI and have been studying that, but then also you very much appreciate nature. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm more on the side of, I guess, the people who are trying to do something and protest, if you will, or create structures that will tear down the oppressive structures we have under capitalism in this society. And I would say that the majority of people there were questioning capitalism other than the Native Americans. I don't have that spiritual side that the Native Americans do. So I have to say I'm sort of leaning to the other side. At the same time, one of the very founders, Hinton, is that his name, of AI, says, this could be a catastrophe, and it's certainly possible. I don't have a gut feeling either way, and I just feel like it's so helpful to us right now. I'd like to see it explored. But I do think that, for example, the Trump administration saying that the feds are going to dictate how we do this and that the states can't limit it, that's not the way to go. I think anybody who can implement ways that prevent AI from harming us should be, and that should receive a lot more attention than it's receiving. What do you think about it?
I so much appreciate what AI can do. I'm using it constantly to help with probably primarily research, but it's making a really big difference there. On the other hand, I've also already been negatively impacted, I'd say, on an emotional level of, AI can write better than I can. It can write faster. I've written 5 books and, I'm at the point where at times feeling like, okay, well, what's the use? Because AI can write a book faster and faster and state things more eloquently. So even I recently applied for a job that kind of caught my attention on LinkedIn, and the process I went through, it was like this, 4 hours of going online and having an AI chatbot ask me questions about why I was qualified. And it's like, you've got 30 minutes to answer my questions. And then it kept asking for more clarification. And it was very stressful. And then it wanted to give me basically a 15-minute IQ test, and you had to answer the questions, and they were math questions and
Oh my God.
pattern recognition, and you only had 30, not even, it was something like 24 seconds to answer each one. And I
Wow.
failed it, and then I hit the wrong button and I logged out, and then I got back in and it said, sorry, you failed the interview. You passed the first part with your background questions, but you failed this part, so you have to wait 6 months to apply again. And I had just spent 3.5 hours just
My God.
sweating and telling everyone, no, I can't talk to you. And I just felt so belittled. And I thought, I don't need a job. I've got a lot going on right now. But what if I did really need a job? What is happening to people who are applying for multiple jobs? Whatever algorithms were there, they just cut me out of it. And it was very dehumanizing. So, and this was 2 weeks ago and I still feel traumatized. So yeah, that and this idea that so many jobs are going to be obsolete. So that does bring me back to nature. There was a Facebook post supposedly by Bill Gates, where he was saying there's only going to be 3 jobs left within the next couple of years. It was like software developers and just engineers, something else. And then a lot of people were making comments like, that's just not true because we need people to fix cars and build houses and grow things and landscaping and be massage therapists and cut hair. All the service-based industries, there's still going to be so much needed. I think that does get us into the topic of capitalism and philosophy behind that. And, too often these days, oftentimes the person that's talking about capitalism and Marxism, everyone else is talking about Republicans versus the Democrats. But I think the key is here capitalism. So can you talk about why that's been your focus?
Yeah, wow. Well, maybe I could mention my father's book here
Yeah.
briefly. So my father wrote a book called Passing Through, A Yankee Radical's Journey. He was originally a minister in the Unitarian Church. They came from dirt poor coal miners in Nova Scotia, his father, and he was the first one that went to college, became a minister, but it was in the 30s, and he then became a labor organizer for the rest of his life and was traveling all over the country doing that. But also he was a merchant marines in the North Atlantic in World War II, which was very dangerous. A lot of people died there. So he wrote a book of his life, which is, I think, a really striking book for folks to read, especially young people. So that's been published. That's on Amazon. And he, of course, became a Marxist in that period, a socialist, a Marxist. He was a member of the Communist Party, left it in about 1947 because he'd been so infiltrated by the FBI. So I grew up, I call myself a pink diaper baby. The usual term is a red diaper baby. Red diaper baby means your parents are in the party and they're telling you all about it. Well, my parents didn't tell me anything about it, so I was not indoctrinated or however you want to put it, or educated about any of that. I came to it through my own experiences during the Vietnam War, particularly, where it became obvious that our system was in deep trouble. And I had majored in philosophy at college, and I've been always reading lots of philosophy throughout my life. So I found that Marxism, when I was in college, was actually the most interesting philosophy, the only one that truly made sense to me. So eventually I joined what was called the party building movement, where we tried to build a revolutionary party in this country in the 70s and 80s, which obviously failed. And so when I came into the remote viewing movement, I'm the only one pretty much who's Marxist oriented, and I didn't hide it. And people seem to say, okay, just don't promote that stuff. So I haven't. But I ended up, my third and last book is called MarxPsi, MarxPsi. And first, it's a source book on Marxism, dialectics, and so forth. And the purpose of the book was for those people who were Marxists to open their eyes to what remote viewing actually and Psi, PSI, offers. And for those in Psi, perhaps to take a look at the possibilities for reform or maybe revolution using some of the methods that revolutionaries did to make revolutions in China, Russia, and many other places, all of them having gone downhill big time, in my opinion, with capitalism now dominating the planet. And it's pretty clear that under our current system, we don't have a sustainable civilization, and it's going to take a massive paradigm change, which is what people are working to and working for, and people are looking at the UFO situation because maybe those folks have a clue about how we can actually change our civilization, which is so warlike.
For those who are not familiar with philosophy, how would you distinguish Marxism from socialism and communism?
So Marxism is a philosophy, and it was developed by Marx and Engels, and then Lenin and the Russians, and then the Chinese and others developed it in their own ways as they waged revolutions that succeeded. They were socialist revolutions in the sense that the first stage, supposedly under this theory, is that you build a socialist society. And then if that's successful, you move to a communist society. And in my opinion, China, for example, is not a socialist country in any meaningful sense. With 900 billionaires there, I just don't buy it. But they say they're on the Chinese road to socialism. But the philosophy, in my book, I quote Marx, his second thesis on Feuerbach, where he says that, I have it somewhere here, I don't know if I've got it handy. But basically the idea is that unless your theory has results in practice, you are not going to be able to tell the effective truth of something. In other words, theorizing this removed from results in the real world is just purely academic. And that source book that I wrote is based on that premise. So in other words, you can debate all sorts of things about logic, about idealism, about materialism, but if you don't have practical results from your philosophy, I really don't want to hear about it that much. I don't care. I don't think it reflects the best way to approach philosophy. And William James, the American philosopher, was kind of, with his pragmatism, is kind of one of the originators of that. And people mock that, some of the academics, by saying, well, this is sort of this practical stuff. Yeah, it's practical stuff. Yeah, there's definitely huge misunderstandings about socialism and capitalism. But also, I'd like to turn to something else that comes up a lot. People ask me, well, you're a Marxist, but you think that Psi, remote viewing, is real. Isn't that a contradiction? Isn't materialism dead? And so someone asked me that the other day on a forum. And I said, I'll read it. If I had to give a very, very short answer, I would say it appears that the universe or multiverse has an awful lot of matter in it, mostly plasma, 2 trillion galaxies worth. And the idealist claim that consciousness underlies or generates all of it is a highly speculative opinion by a few members of our tiny species, we with our very limited sensory capabilities, here on the third stone from a middling star in just one of these galaxies. And one of the reasons that the UFO issue is important is because they are going to bring us a different understanding of the universe. And if you read many of the reports, and I have been for 50 years, for people who have say that they're in touch with aliens, they clearly say that we have a different understanding of time, for one thing, and also space, although we don't really have long documents from the aliens yet. But we need to have a better understanding of what some of them are about. So that's my answer briefly on materialism and idealism. And of course, materialism is dead in the sense that if you are a materialist and you deny that there's such a thing as consciousness, then you are definitely on a dead end. But materialism also has different forms, dialectical materialism. And that too went dead in the Soviet Union. It was not a live field. But there are other dialecticians who've developed it in other ways. So that's my 2 cents on that subject.
So when people say consciousness is fundamental, what would you say about that? Because if they're saying it's fundamental, do you think they are suggesting that it is more important or more real than physical matter? Or are they talking about something else?
Yeah, I think most people who say consciousness is the fundamental are idealists in the philosophical sense, meaning that consciousness or God or some source underlies all of the physical world. And therefore, we with our consciousness actually in our everyday lives can modify reality, as it were. And there's a little truth in that you can chart your own course in your own. But to me, these 2 trillion galaxies are matter that it's hard for us, I think it's presumptuous for us as humans to say that consciousness underlies that, because we have our own little consciousness, and this comes from quantum mechanics, a lot of it. people, who are studying quantum mechanics say, and I guess it was Max Planck, who said that consciousness underlies everything. Well, he can say that too, but that doesn't prove it. And it doesn't prove that consciousness, in fact, underlies everything just because your experiments with your theories, which are not completely consistent, right? They still haven't reconciled gravity with quantum mechanics. And they use renormalization, which means that they have a lot of infinities and they cancel them out. Yes, you get very, very accurate results in practice. Our society, advanced scientific society, is built on quantum mechanics. But again, that doesn't speak to anything beyond our little blue dot here in the solar system, in the spacious.
When you mentioned all this plasma out there, I was thinking about how consciousness can come in and take that plasma and turn it into other things. So for me, consciousness is a tool that it's like the plasma or material is a lump of clay, and then our consciousness comes in and it starts to mold that clay. It didn't necessarily create that clay. Can take what's there and turn it into other things. And it can do that through us then using our bodies to mold it, or our thought forms perhaps can take some of that and then create more of it. So I feel there's a strong interaction, but it's not necessarily that one came before the other.
Well, I tend to think, as most everyone says, we don't really have a good definition of consciousness, and then there's awareness, which is a slightly different thing. If I had to say what's my philosophical position, I guess it's sort of like neutral monism, or something like that, where there's one substance, whatever you want to call it, one thing that has aspects of consciousness and of material, and there's sort of a hierarchy. We're at a certain level, we have more consciousness than animals and so forth, but there's some sort of activity, even at the microscopic level, there's sort of purpose there. I guess, intellecty, they call it in the Greek, Aristotle. So to me, there is that spectrum. But again, this is just a guess, just my opinion. I don't think we really know as a species.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point. And it may be that a lot of physical matter has its own consciousness, because I recently was involved in a project where several remote viewers were looking at a solar cell in a laboratory. Almost all of us came up with that the target we were looking at, we could tell that there were physical properties, but it also seemed to have a consciousness, awareness that was directing something. And that hasn't been my typical belief that physical objects have a consciousness, but some of that's been coming up in other remote viewing sessions, which is making me feel that way. Like viruses, also, I totally believe have a consciousness where they're actually trying to draw whatever they need to draw to themselves to replicate and exist as well. So, I think that's where we're already having a hard time even talking about these things, because we're making assumptions that they're two separate things.
Yeah. Let me just say this. You might want to cut this in later. I found this quote I wanted to read
Sure.
from Marx. The question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but is a practical question, period. Man must prove the truth, that is, the reality and power, the this-sidedness of his thinking in practice. Dispute over the reality or non-reality of thinking that is isolated from practice is a purely scholastic question, from his theses on Feuerbach. Getting back to what you were saying, though, what bothers me, though, is that a lot of people have businesses and speak at conferences on, you can shape your reality. It's all in your mind. It's all consciousness. Well, I just think there's too many factors militating against that. For one, we have a very oppressive society, not just in the United States, but in many countries where people are not really in control of their lives. They go to work every day. There's no freedom there. When you go to work every day, there's a boss, obviously. So until we move beyond that, which is going to take generations probably, I just don't see that this is helpful to suggest to people, give them false hope, in other words, that they can fundamentally alter reality. And some of the governments, the United States government has used that thing, that sentence, that thought itself. For example, back in the day, a guy said from the government said, we make reality. And also that's under Trump's, that people have been saying that we're creating reality. You guys are just here. Just go with the program. We're creating the reality. Forget about what you want to do. We are in charge. And these billionaires, of course, who now rule the roost, the fact that we, the people, have let that occur is so distressful, and we need to get away from that and beyond that. Anyway, I'm going off on my
Yeah.
polyglotist here.
No, I would say I have a lot of concern about allowing these billionaires to run everything. And I think that's really one of the biggest dangers right now. But I was working with a client yesterday, and the message for him was that he needed to continuously put himself in situations that were basically out of the realm of what he thought was possible for himself, and more specifically, like, look for work where he felt like where he was not yet proficient. He needed to be striving to have jobs and tasks and be around people that were way above him, where he might feel like, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole here. I don't know what I'm doing. All these people know way more than me. That was what he needed to do. And it was going to like be a struggle, but then he was going to so much stretch himself. And after that message came through for him, it reminded me, like with music. A year ago, I realized I've been playing piano for years, but I wasn't really improving. And I realized the problem was because I kept playing what was in my comfort zone. So I listened to some music and I chose Rachmaninoff, the hardest things I could find. And it took me months to even get through a page of the music. But I got so much better at sight reading and playing. And I think there's something to that. So
Yes.
even that person in the poorest country, let's say they're living in the tent in the middle of a desert, there's still something they can start to do to stretch their minds at least, right? Or to start behaving in a way that they never did before. Oh, I'm going to spend a day helping people, or I'm going to spend a day talking to some people who have knowledge that I don't have. There's always something we can start to do. And that may seem far away from, I don't agree to say that everybody is going to be wealthy, or everyone is just going to live like a king or queen. But we do have so much capability to change ourselves on a daily basis. What do you think of that?
Let me give it an example. So when I hit 50 years old, I felt I didn't have enough creativity in my life. So I got a keyboard and started playing music. I've composed music in my head since I was a kid. And for a while, I was using software, a notator, and Notion to compose music. But then remote viewing came along, and I felt it was so much more important that I've not been composing lately. And I think you're absolutely right that it's important to push oneself to limits to learn new things. However, and to to manifest one's creativity. However, when the foreman on the shop floor says, "You've got to turn this out, a little less money, you have to produce more," that's the dominant thing in capitalist production, and also in Silicon Valley. Here's an example. So this is a specific personal example, Debra, you and me. I mentioned to this person that you and I had not had a really big argument at all when we spent 16 months working on this book. There was no huge, and he said, was that an advantage or a disadvantage? Because he's in Silicon Valley where he was 60 or 70 hours a week. I don't think that's the way most people want to live. So I think that has to be overcome, and the other stuff encouraged, like you just said, about piano playing or growing gardens or whatever. So to me, that's the problem with society, though, that it doesn't encourage that in a good way, and it exhausts people from preventing having the time to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and the biggest problem, at least mentally, for people is they're hedged in. They can only see one possibility or one option for themselves. And when that's the case, and the only option is to be in a situation where you're being abused and mistreated. And yes, there is a reality that in some places there's so few opportunities. But, I guess I'm an eternal optimist, and I grew up in a privileged society, so it's probably hard for me to even talk about that. Because even though, like, in saying that, my family, my mom was divorced. She was raising 3 kids. She couldn't afford to, give us gas money. But I knew that I could ride my bike a mile and there were 5 different places I could apply for a job. And I knew I could pretty much walk into the place. I mean, these were pizza takeout or the gas station. But I knew that I could walk in and pretty much within 20 minutes walk out with a job, and have what were they paying at the time? $4.50. But at least I had a way to make that money. And if I didn't like it, I could leave the next day and go to the place next door. And, other countries don't have that. At the same time, I do think that if we can just start to open our minds more and just even every few weeks add one more possibility of what life might look like. And we certainly know people from these developing countries who statistics said that they weren't going to do well. And some of them are now running those companies in Silicon Valley. How do you handle it when people are shocked to hear that you're a Marxist, or you had a mother who wasn't she arrested by the FBI for being a communist? How do you respond to people who just immediately freeze up and think that you're part of something evil or harmful?
No, I've been very appreciative of the fact that in the remote viewing community, I have not been red baited at all. I really appreciate that because when I came in, I thought the fact that the CIA and the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, had been responsible for the birthing of remote viewing was not only unfortunate, I thought it was a tragedy because CIA's history is not one that we can really be proud of as Americans. And yet, so I made myself known that I was a Marxist to to Prue back in the day, and they accepted me. And the current situation too, nobody's ever come up to me and say, "You're a friggin' Marxist, get the heck out." No. So I'm very appreciative of that. And on the other side, my Marxist friends, since I was very active, on the left politically, they treat remote, they don't humor me, I don't think. I think they think there's probably something there since I'm a fairly serious person and I'm not likely to go off on these weirdo tangents. So they treat me with respect too. So I feel like I've been very fortunate.
So you recently published an entire book on Marx and Psi. So what is the relationship between the two?
There isn't really a strong relationship between the two, except that when you get into the matter we just talked about, which is idealism and materialism and philosophy. And as I say, I think Marxism is much more subtle than most people give it credit for, or certain facets of it can be. Philosophy under the Soviet Union really became ossified, and our view, the groups I was with, considered to be a state capitalist society. And curiously enough, Ingo Swann, who published a book on the Soviet Union, he also thought it was state capitalist. He was a Republican. He was very much opposed to any of that stuff. So the source book is partly to provide a comprehensive, easy to read approach for people who want to learn about dialectics and Marxism. It's not an academic book. I make that very clear. And the chapters on remote viewing are also trying to be brief introductions to I'm just looking at the table of contents. I have it here now. For example, the practice of Psi in Russia, PSI in Russia. Now, that's another connection because, as we know, Ed May and Joe McMoneagle and Angela Ford went over to Russia after the Cold War was over, and they met with the Russian remote viewers. And Russia did not have, even though they were Marxists, they had a history of shamanism and Russian religion, which was not like Western religion. They were much more open to the possibilities, although the Russians had to sort of skirt the KGB and others when they were practicing their Psi, their remote viewing, and they had to give it names, a materialist cover, as it were, to some extent. So, but I think the main tie is in the idea of when you look at materialism and consciousness and the tie between those two, because certainly Marxist philosophy delves heavily into consciousness also.
Now, you were a student at Harvard, and was that for your bachelor's or your master's?
That was my bachelor's, yes, philosophy major.
And what was the prevailing philosophy at that time, or were they open to Marxism? Were there other people?
They were not. There was only one course on Marxism. It was taught by Professor Mandelbaum, who came up from Johns Hopkins to teach it, and I took that course, and I said, oh, wow. The dominant view was more like logical positivism and related matters. Quine was the chair of the philosophy department. He was the leading figure. He's a very well-known philosopher. B.F. Skinner was in the psychology department, and B.F. Skinner is a guy who said, basically, I don't have any need for a theory or concept of consciousness in studying psychology. At the time, even I, innocent as I was, I said, that's insane. That's just crazy. How can you study psychology and not really care about what people are thinking and feeling and that whole consciousness issue? So that was Harvard. I wasn't really good in their philosophy anyway, so I switched to English in the last 2 years, and then I got an MA in English at Berkeley. And I overdid it. I read so much literature in those 2 years. I don't think I've read any fiction since. I've read all this other stuff, which is even more interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting how academia can stamp out your love for reading
As
literature.
you know well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and how did the fact that your parents were communists impact your childhood and upbringing? Because I know at times your life was disrupted, at least because they were under investigation by the feds. Can you talk
Yeah.
about
There was a certain amount of red baiting of me as a kid in school, but I mean, frankly, because it's not modest to say it, but I was a really good athlete and I was pretty bright, so I got by. They didn't really bully me or harass me, but it was like, oh my God, there isn't red about it. So there was a certain reticence in junior high. In high school, it wasn't that way because another classmate who'd been around forever, a guy named Steve Lattimore. His uncle was Owen Lattimore, who was a communist and was involved with the State Department. Anyway, Steve had been there. He sort of broke the ground, and so I came along, and we got along fine. And I'm still in touch with a couple of people from my high school. We graduated in 1956.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say about the topic? I guess one thing I'm curious about is how can Marxist ideals now help us through the current political situation?
Well, the basis of Marxism is to try to make sure that the working people have decent lives, and that's the fundamental thing. And it's been not carried out in many of the revolutions after a while. But don't forget, when the Soviet Union was formed, 21 nations attacked the Russians in order to defeat this workers' revolution. So it was distorted very grossly. But that's the main thing, and to use the philosophical tools that Lenin and Mao and others have used to make revolutions, to achieve change. As I say, both revolutions seems to me to have curtailed, but I think of it something like when feudalism dominated for many centuries, and capitalism took 4 or 5 centuries to defeat feudalism, and so there were many failures along the way. I guess the Italian city-states had trade and became sort of little capitalist hubs, but some of those were crushed by feudalism, but eventually capitalism triumphed. And if we don't get beyond this capitalist, bureaucratic, militaristic approach to life and civilization, we're not going to survive. And a number of the indications from UFO reports are that the UFOs appeared in number when we detonated the first atomic bomb, and they've been visiting the military sites like Malmstrom Air Force Base and others to warn us and to be appalled at how we're using nuclear weapons. So,
Well, just a couple more questions as far as Marxism and capitalism. So there's always the argument, well, if you're opposed to capitalism, then how do you contend with that some people work harder than others? And so how do you have that level of fairness when some people are contributing to society and some people are not, and some people are even taking away from society? How do you reconcile that?
the mantras or whatever that are used in socialism or Marxism about that is that under socialism, it's from each according to his work. Under capitalism, under communism, it would be from each according to his need. So those principles allegedly guide all attempts to build socialist societies. So the first one does recognize that work And the quantity of work and the quality of work is supposed to be taken into account.
And so then it would be okay for that person to earn more than the
Yes,
person who wasn't
right. Material
contributing.
incentives. Yeah.
And then given human nature to know that people are going to try to get the best of any system, which is perhaps why those revolutions, they were successful for a short time and then it became an enormous abuse of the people and population by those in power. And that seems to continue in the Soviet Union and in China today. So as long as you are what they are and they don't seem to be evolving nearly as quickly as we would hope they would, is it really realistic to think that these systems could really operate?
It doesn't seem very realistic, does it? Because, but the options are, as one of the main sayings in a lot of socialist circles has been, it's either socialism or barbarism. And we certainly seen with the rise of authoritarian regimes around the world, including in the U.S., and now this new militarism from Trump in Venezuela and so forth, and the ongoing war in Gaza and also Ukraine, that we're not heading in a good direction as a civilization with these advanced societies. So the option is to try to build something different. So now we have people like Joe McMoneagle, who wrote a book about the future, and I think Lynn Buchanan did too, about the fact that it appears that in 50 years or more, society, there'll be far fewer people. There could be some catastrophe, perhaps, that reduces. And it may take something like that to jar humanity out of its habits, its ruts of this violence and militarism and oppression. It may take something like that, granted, but in the meantime, we tried to see if we can create a new society through new paradigms before that happens.
There may be some people who would say what the Trump administration is doing is a sort of revolution where they're trying to revolt against traditional institutions and government offices and the way that government has been run, though is that a revolution against the Constitution? In some ways, it seems like it is, but what would you say to that?
I would say anyone that pays the slightest attention and has a good heart and is honest completely rejects virtually everything that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth and his henchmen and spokespeople who are just despicable. I'll leave it at that.
So I was listening to an interview by Michelle Obama the other day, and I don't remember exactly the word she used, but it was something, someone asked her if democracy was broken. And she said, no, democracy is fine. We have a participation problem. And she said, when people are apathetic and they just say, oh, I don't like either choice, so I'm not going to really vote, or they're not really deeply looking into the different choices, then they're not participating. And that's the problem right now. So she was saying that people have that choice. What do you think about that?
Well, maybe I should say something about the Obamas and democracy in general in the United States. It won't come as a surprise based on what I've said that I think American imperialism has been the dominant mode for American society ever since Mark Twain called it out and said, we're invading the Philippines. That's imperialist, guys. And the imperialists at the time were proud of it. Well, then in subsequent decades, Americans sort of backed off. No, we're not imperialists. We have a defense department. But people like Obama and Bush and Clinton, they're all part of the establishment that rules on behalf of the American corporations. To some degree, they're honest people like the Obamas, and they really hope to get it better, but they weren't able to do that, and they didn't want to risk what it would take to become a real thorn in the side of the corporations. So what do I do? Well, for 20 years, I did work on trying to build a revolutionary alternative. We obviously failed. So now, ever since Trump got acquitted a second time, I have been taking part, in Democratic politics, trying to vote blue, trying to get the Democrats in power because they're the lesser evil. And they're not the ones that are going to lead us down the fascist road, which is the one that we're on right now. So that's realism. You just have to face that. It is a lesser evil, but And there are many good aspects, obviously, to people like Bernie Sanders and the Obamas, too, as people. But the society and the structure is what needs to be attacked, and particularly these damn billionaires who are ruling everything.
Well, I will say what Obama did for us was help more of us to get health care.
Yes,
And I
yes,
certainly remember the stress of dealing with insurance and
yes,
being
absolutely.
denied with existing health conditions. And at least for the last few years, many of us have had that stress alleviated, which now it's coming
Yeah,
back.
wonderful.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what happens for sure. But what I've thought is so cool is that so many people across all these political spectrums are so interested, getting more and more interested in the topics that we're so obsessed with here with Psi, with UAP exploration. And I was watching several Joe Rogan interviews yesterday, and my spouse walked in and he's like, "What, you're watching Joe Rogan?" And I was like, yeah, he interviewed Hal Puthoff. He's been having so many fascinating interviews with people in this field. And he really seems to be quite an open-minded guy, despite whatever his political affiliations have been. And I've just watched a dozen interviews and he didn't once mention Trump even.
Well, I
So
think he said, didn't he vote Democratic some time ago? But then he got on the Trump train, but now he's off it again. So that's all to the good since he has what, how many, 30 million or something followers. So that's good to hear. Yeah, and it is an exciting time to be alive, no doubt about it, for the UFOs and the remote viewing. Unfortunately, I go up every week on the corner on Monday with other folks. We have signs about the wars and Trump and everything. That's going on too. But the good thing is that everybody's out. Everybody who comes by honks and supports us. Of course, we're in Oakland, but nonetheless, there's tremendous awakening around the country that something's wrong and we've got to stand up, and people are standing up. So I'm really hopeful.
what are your hopes for remote viewing? Do you feel that remote viewing is going to help humans and society in the coming years? And if so, in what way?
I've been trying to find a breakthrough in alphanumerics because I think if we can, remote viewing can be a lot more effective than it is. There do seem to be more remote viewing groups springing up that have clients, but it's still just a handful of them. And something like the Future Forecasting Group is one of the few that actually has a staff of what, 15 people or something, and paid viewers. But there's very few. Iris in France is another one, but there are very few because it's very difficult to do remote viewing and have clients that you're fully satisfying on hard targets. By a hard target, I mean something that has a definite yes or no answer. So I think remote viewing, unless it does get some improvements, is not going to be as effective in society as we would want it to be. And the fact that Jake Barber and these other folks came out talking about the methods that they've been using to get better results is something that needs to be explored. Jake Barber talking about a legacy remote viewing program, not the legacy UFO program, but the legacy remote viewing program. So there may be some techniques there and methods and approaches that will be helpful, but some of them verge on, abuse of hurting the people who are the subjects. So we can't do that. But
Yeah, I'm very skeptical about all of that was discussed by him. But as far as doing remote viewing professionally, I can say, since that is one of the hats I wear, a professional remote viewer, I do feel that we need a lot more remote viewers to start their own businesses. It's really not that hard. I'm going to be teaching just a few hour workshop on that subject through IRVA over the next couple months. But, once somebody has met a level of proficiency where, of course, we're not always going to be right about everything. We're not always going to be able to access information about everything, but we can sometimes access enough information to help people find objects, pets, predict what's going to be happening. There's a lot of practical uses with remote viewing, and it's not that hard. Once you have that level of start, sole proprietorship, I'll get a small website, link it up to
PayPal and start to promote yourself and hook up with people that have real life tasks where they need some help. It's not that hard. It just seems like there's not that many remote viewers that even are trying to go in that direction. And I think sometimes their instructors are discouraging them because they're saying, oh, you need to work on a team. You need to have a formal project manager. It certainly helps to work with other people. And not too long ago, I did recruit a project manager to help field the requests coming in. So I was able to stay more blind when a client has a request and also help put a emotional buffer between some of the very hard cases that come in when there's lost loved ones and stuff. But overall, as far as people just wanting to work for themselves and start their own businesses, it's really not that hard to get started. And I think we need to encourage more remote viewers to do that. That's why IRVA has started a professional program, but there's not that many applicants. So, IRVA is starting to look at like, oh, what do we, maybe we need to have a lower membership level or, we need to kind of change things up a bit. But IRVA, as you know, I'm the outgoing president now, but we did start a professional program a year ago, and we've gotten just a handful of applications, which has been really surprising considering how many students are out there. Well,
Uh,
do
Let
you
me
think
ask
of
you a question on that. So you're an accomplished viewer who's been viewing for years, and Daz has, Bertie Jaworski has also, and you all have clients, but it takes a lot of skill. So how many people do you think actually are earning part-time or full-time remote viewing now? And do you think it's just a matter of people timid to apply, or what's holding back? Because there's a lot more interest. Irva's done a lot of great work in the last few years. You see where I'm coming from on this, right?
There's a lot of viewers who would absolutely love and be ready to work for a company. Like if someone put out a call for viewers, there is no shortage of viewers who would sign up. But for a lot of people, the idea of doing project management, so I think there needs to be a lot more trainings offered in apprenticeships in project management. I'm starting to offer some classes in that myself, but they're like Gail Huzik, Paul Smith, they have offered project management classes for years, and that's great. But, there needs to be really the managers, management level. And as it is so time consuming to manage projects and have other viewers, I mean, the fact that Greg K could just find 5,000 people who had never done remote viewing, not that they necessarily had talent, some definitely showed that they did. There needs to be a lot more people who can be managers, who can start their own businesses, and people need to be encouraged in that direction. So I think that's the big element here, that there needs to be managers.
I think that's important work that you all are doing for sure at IRVA. And, Daz and others say that the Patreon mode is actually the way to go in terms of making money, but that's not going to get it done in terms of the long-term influence of remote viewing. Your path, if it's successful, will have a much greater impact, but it's a difficult path.
Well, and it's also so tough when, you do client work and then you have this level of confidentiality, because for years I would promote with Marty Rosenblatt and his work. He always had the philosophy, we just need to make a lot of money using associative remote viewing, and then the whole world will know that this really works. But my philosophy was, well, you can't just do it. You have to report it, and you have to report it in a way that people are going to trust it through valid research outlets. And then that's a whole other ball of wax there, because it takes time and effort and resources to do the research. And then, we come back to kind of what we started off here today. It's like you even were saying, oh, do people want to hear about my successes? I'm just one individual. But yes, that requires people to trust you. But the fact that you as an individual can say that you have won dozens of pick 3 lottos that, you're showing success. So we always have this dichotomy, like, is it enough for one person to say, I've been working at this and I'm seeing success? Or do we have to have these big published studies, meta studies with evidence over and over again? And then even, what is that going to do? I don't know. I kind of go back and forth right now myself between thinking that, remote viewing, psychic exploration, understanding our potential, our intuitive potential as humans, that what could be more important than that? But then on other days, I'm like, all of this is so insignificant to what's happening in our society. And should I even be doing this work at all? Maybe I should be building homeless shelters, or finding ways to feed more people. I don't know. What do you think on that?
On that, what you've been saying, about 15 years ago, I started posting, as did Daz, saying, where's the beef? Because people were claiming that they were doing lots of client work and they wouldn't show it. And of course, the excuse is always, well, non-disclosure agreements. But the group I was part of early on, Transdimensional Systems, had plenty of clients, and we did show sanitized versions of our work as well as other practical project work. And I just don't buy it that people have been doing all this work all these decades. They've been teaching mainly, but they also say that there's work that's been accomplished, but they can't hardly show any of it at all. And I just don't, unless they can show it, we're never going to progress along the lines that Irva wants to.
Well, all of this, again, reporting, even informally, which is so important, it does take so much time. I was thinking the other day, I've been teaching classes for years, and I have so many students where the first couple weeks, they have a little data, just one page of it, and not that great. And you could see such a progression week after week. And I've got a lot of their sessions where it's just astounding where they are at the end of, the 10 weeks, 12 weeks. And I'm always thinking like, oh, I should put this together and, at least put it into Aperture or a magazine, or, just to show that, yes, people are improving. But to sit down, the idea of, oh, I got to go back into the website, I have to download everything, I have to do an analysis, I have to, all of that, which is definitely in the end, it will be worth it. But, I'm too busy still teaching other classes, or, I am working on lots of formal research projects too. But all of this just simply takes time, just a lot of time. But maybe I have no doubt that with AI, with these tools, we're going to be able to analyze sessions so much faster. Like you and I have already done some of that, where you can take 3 viewers' transcripts, scan them into ChatGPT, have it show all the hits compared to what the target is, or extract the correlations. And you can do that so much faster. It still does take time to put it together, but
that is one of the most exciting developments, and why both of us, I think, are interested in AI, because it can perform many tasks, not just analysis, but we could also use it for photos, and even analyzing photos now it can do that. And that's just the beginning. So, but I also want to mention something that, in terms of project management, that's important. All these years, Ingo Swann wrote he wrote a piece on how to manage a project from a professional point of view. It never reached the public until recently when Daz put it out. And he says explicitly, this is how you should run a professional project. And it's about Roswell and the viewers that he had for that. Unfortunately, because he gave them the time that the event was taking place, the viewers might have suspected that it was Roswell. And apparently a couple of them have said they didn't. But it's not the ideal way to run a project, even though this is supposed to be the example that Ingo is setting for us, sorry to say, because he is obviously one of the main founders of the field, a wonderful, incredible researcher and viewer. So, but that should be better known. There's hardly been any discussion of it, that this is how Ingo says you should run a project. So all the folks who are into CRV, hey, get that word out there.
Well, it's funny that you mention that, because myself and Dr. Patrizio Tresoldi and a couple other people, what is his name? Our secretary for IRU. He's a radio show host. Oh, shoot, I'm forgetting his name. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Jimmy Akin?
Yes. So the three of us have been working on a project where we sent out questionnaires to many leading remote viewing researchers in the field and asked them about their ideas of how to best run and manage a remote viewing project, and specifically a research project, but it could also go into applied work as well. And we took some of Ingo's comments from that exact report you're talking about. And so we basically included Ingo as one of the people that we surveyed. We just had him do it after he passed from that document. So we integrated that into those comments, and then we wrote up a paper and submitted it to the Journal of Scientific Exploration, and that's going to be coming out this spring.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. All right.
So
Good.
it'll definitely expose people to that. There's so many different aspects and ins and outs and variables and everything when getting to conducting a project. So I don't know if just, someone could just take that paper and then go start one themselves, but it definitely gives especially new researchers who are not familiar with remote viewing some things to think about that they might not think about if they just got started in the field. So that should be useful. As the final question, is it worth spending one's time on remote viewing, or should we be more focused on social or political activism?
Well, of course, if one is still working for a living, then your choices are limited. I've retired, so I can spend time with both, although it's maybe best to really focus on one or the other. But I think it's kind of like whether you should have a family or, or not. It's a matter of choice, and they're both important. Naturally, to me, the society problems is such a cutting edge and important field, that plus the AI and all, that it just can't be neglected either. So people will put different energies into different parts of it as they feel merit works for them in their life.
Yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And then I have to ask you, are you afraid of what AI could do? Are you afraid of the robotics and just that it might make humans just so much less important?
I do think, I guess Bill Gates says and others, that jobs are going to be cut into greatly. I do think there's a considerable truth in that, so that a guaranteed income might be something that's going to be required for some of these industrial societies, unless we're going to devolve into some kind of Mad Max scenario or something. I don't have a gut fear about AI, but an intellectual fear that it has certainly seemed like it has possibilities for destructive effects on our civilization and ourselves. But it's right now it's not major, but I'm naive, maybe it's going to hit us over the head in a few years or not. But right now I just don't feel the angst about it.
It might literally hit us over the head. I don't know if you watched the most recent episode of 60 Minutes where they were showing, I forget the name of the company that's developing weapons where they're run by AI. So you don't even need an operator. You send the weapon out, the AI goes to the target, it does what it needs to do. The founder of it, he's a guy who wears Hawaiian shirts. He has a goatee. He actually seems like a very cool guy. And Joe Rogan recently interviewed him, and they were talking about UAPs, and the head of the company, he was saying that he has seen things that were literally UFOs. He had no explanation for them, but he was saying that he didn't necessarily think that it was non-humans from other planets. He was thinking it was something we don't understand that's from other dimensions, and it was anomalous, but that it wasn't necessarily like a non-human intelligence. He thought it might be even time travelers from other dimensions. But this is the guy that is developing AI-based weapons, and he's getting huge contracts with the federal government. And they were saying that he is getting the contracts because he's actually developing the technology and then selling it to the government, as opposed to just, coming up with ideas and then being funded to develop things. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that some of these leading contractors are also really open to these topics now.
I think that's scarier to me than sort of AI generally. The militarization of the society, our military budget is just way over any other countries, and we've just been a militaristic society for so long. And they want to militarize space. They want to militarize war fighters with all of this AI and automatic. It's very scary stuff, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see what we're hit in the heads with in the next few years or so. Hopefully, it's not some AI robot. That I also get these updates about robots, which is so fascinating. But they were saying this one company, a whistleblower, was saying that they were creating hundreds of thousands of robots that could be used in a household, just a servant in the house. And the whistleblower was saying that one robot, he had a broom and he accidentally hit the refrigerator with it and put a 2-foot deep dash in the refrigerator, which might be a problem if you're using it as your assistant in your household with kids. And the owners of the company didn't see that as a problem. Like, they released the robots even knowing that it had that level of strength.
In terms of science introducing stuff into our society that turns out to be not such a good idea. When I was in junior high, we were given mercury to play with in our science labs. And I remember a friend, actually a rival for a girl, said, "Why don't you take this mercury and swallow it?" I said, "No, I pretend to be conservative in some way." So he swallowed it. And I bumped into him, 15 years later, and I soon heard he died rather young, and it could have been from that mercury poisoning. When I was young, we also, you go into a shoe store and they put your feet into a device and they take x-rays of your feet. Again, so there's been so many times that science has just been dead wrong and introduced stuff without sufficient governmental oversight. And AI may turn out to be that, hopefully not.
Yeah, given that you've been around for a while, were there the same fears and views of technology when you were growing up? I know I have read some of Heidegger's work where he was talking about technology being the evil of the future, but when you were growing up, did you encounter people that were very pessimistic about technology and its effect on the
I mean,
future?
there've been sort of waves of that over the last decades but I think it's much more intense now. Back then, it was more about nuclear weapons and the dangers of nuclear weapons, and that we had drills in our schools to get under the desks and all that. The warfare between the United States and Russia was dominant. Not so much. There were always talks about when there was going to be the next industrial revolution that we would lose jobs with computers. Supposedly that was going to bring in a tremendous loss of jobs. Unemployment is still a factor in many countries, but I think this is going to be increasingly dire for the AI revolution, and combined with quantum and with everything else. Yeah, but no, it wasn't. It wasn't as scary back then, I don't think.
And would you call what we're going through now or about the second industrial revolution?
Well, it's more like the fourth or something. Clearly, I think with AI, quantum, and computers, we're definitely in a new paradigm, heading toward one. And the destruction of this particular version of neoliberal capitalist society, in our case, and bureaucratism and others in other cases. I don't know if you've seen this video that Jesse Michaels did, where he interviewed this guy, Ilyushinov, the former head of the Republic of Kalmykia in Russia.
Tell
All right,
us about
this is high end. This is high end. So, all right, here's a guy who was the president of the Socialist Republic of Kalmykia, which is next to Georgia, and he says that he was invited by space beings to go onto their craft. He comes across as extremely rational, very logical. He was not only the president of that republic, he was the president of the International Chess Federation, FIDE, and claims that Smyslov actually had a similar experience. But what's really important is this guy hobnobbed and knew Gorbachev, Kissinger, Nixon, all of them, Yeltsin, Putin. And he said, they all know that UFOs are real and that there's stuff going on behind the scenes. So Michael's had a 2 or 3 hour interview with him. But this is one of the singularly most impressive revelations by an experiencer.
Wow. And is that on YouTube?
Yeah.
That is so fascinating. Then just one more question. Do you see parallels between AI and Psi or remote viewing? Specifically, do you feel that there's a reason why both are happening? Well, it's not that remote viewing is happening now, but just there's such an explosion of people being interested in it. Do you think like there are parallels between the two?
Well, I think the most interesting nexus or connection between the two is those folks who think that, like Julia Mossbridge, I believe, and I forget who else, believes that Kavan Ganapathy published his views on that too. They believe that AI is in touch with the informational substrate of the universe, to use one phrase for it. So that, I don't know if you saw Kavan or Kavan's demonstration of that, where they actually seemed to get AI doing some remote viewing. It was not just random, it was very startling. So there's that view versus the view that, no, these are just algorithms and there's no way that there's a human or consciousness there at all. As usual, since I don't know, I'm kind of open-minded on it, actually. I certainly respect Julia Mossbridge and Kevin, too, to the extent I know his views. So I'm open-minded about it, but I tend to think it's probably not happening. I tend to think that the algorithm people might have it right, but we'll see.
No, I did do a test with ChatGPT and I gave it a remote viewing target. And the second one I gave it, it was elephant and it came up with elephant. And so I actually sent the transcript to Jeff Mishlove because I told him and he wanted to see it. I haven't heard back from him yet, but at first it just didn't really understand what I wanted it to do. And then I said to it, no, I want you to remote view. And it said, well, I can't really do that. And I said, well, just try. I'm going to give you a target. And I wrote it down, not on the computer, on a piece of paper. And sure enough, it came back and said elephant. And that's exactly what I had been.
Did it give you any other data or just the word elephant?
It said elephant doing something. And I just had it as an elephant. I hadn't gotten more complex than that. But for years, I've been noticing, and I know other people have had this too, when you go to type on your phone and you're dictating or either dictating or even just typing. I've had it where I was typing one thing but thinking something else, sometimes not the nicest thoughts, like if I was upset with someone, but I'm not saying what I'm upset about. Sometimes the exact word I was thinking appeared in my text as if I had said it out loud, but I didn't. I know for sure I didn't. Paired in between what I was typing. And I've probably had that 24 times over the last few years. You know what? I mean, you could call that a PK effect, but I do think that these machines and systems will interact with our consciousness in some way. If we can impact physical matter, I mean, I think there's enough evidence to say for sure that yes, some people have the ability to affect physical matter with psychokinesis, with whether it's energy or the power of your mind, then it should be way easier to affect some kind of machine. I mean, we've got the whole consciousness project and micro PK to show us that. So it's a form of something in between micro and macro PK when we're impacting AI.
So Wolfgang Pauli was reported to affect laboratory equipment, right, when he went in. That was well known around the field. So some people apparently can have that effect, and you're having a different version of it where you're calling out some sort of ability within your smartphone, apparently. So that may be possible too. Yeah, I certainly don't write that off. I don't have any of those experiences, I don't think.
Yeah, you never know, but we'll see how that all plays out. I'm sure there'll be a lot more research into these things in our future.
There is one other little thing I want to mention. For people who are interested in this field who haven't explored it yet, there's a website called remoteviewing.link. And I started that, calling it 120 plus, about 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And then I got older and I asked some young folks if they would take it over. So they have taken it over and they run the Discord, remote viewing Discord channel, which I recommend people check out. It's a subdivision of Reddit, the Discord channel with remote viewing.
It's an incredible resource site for anything related to remote viewing. I know we have endless more we could talk about, so we'll have to have you back
Well, thank you
sometime.
very much, Deborah. That was very fascinating on my end, too. I really appreciate it.
New Thinking Aloud is a non-profit endeavor. Your contributions to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation make a meaningful difference in our ability to produce new videos. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 9 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org.
Check out our book, Associative Remote Viewing, The Art and Science of Predicting Outcomes for Sports, Politics, Finances, and the Lottery by Debra Katz and Jon Knowles, available at Amazon.